She found a stranger face down in the grass by her fence line, one arm reaching for a hat that had rolled away, his horse standing patient a few yards off. She checked his breathing first. Then she lifted the saddle to look for blood and found something worse. Branded into the leather, deep and old, a mark her family had hated for 20 years. The mark of the man everyone believed had burned her mother alive. Wyoming Territory, 1887. Ren Ashby had exactly one choice in that moment, and it had nothing to do with old grudges. He was hurt. She was there, that was the whole of the arithmetic. What she didn't know yet was that nursing that stranger back to health was about to unravel a 20-year lie, so carefully kept that even the man carrying it barely remembered what the truth actually looked like anymore. And when her father comes home early and sees that brand on the saddle in her own yard, what happens next is going to test every single thing she's built in the 6 weeks since she found him. Stay till the end. The truth about that fire isn't what anyone in this valley has believed for 2 decades. Ren Ashby found him on a Tuesday morning in September, riding out to check the east fence that had been leaning since the last heavy rain. She almost rode past him. He was in the tall grass between the fence post and the creek bank, face down, one arm stretched toward a hat that had rolled a few feet away. His horse, a dark bay with a black mane, stood 3 yards off, reins trailing, watching her with the patience of an animal that had been waiting a while. She got down. He was breathing. She checked that first, the way her father had taught her, start with the facts you can confirm. A shallow cut above his left eye, dried and cracked open again from the fall. His right shoulder sat wrong, badly wrenched, she guessed, not broken. His skin was cold in some places and too warm in others, the particular chill of a man who'd spent a whole night on wet ground after a storm. She loosened the girth to ease his breathing, and when she lifted the saddle skirt to check for blood underneath, she saw it, a mark tooled into the leather on the fender, deep and old. A crow above 2 crossed lines. She knew that mark. Everyone on the Ashby property knew that mark. She looked at it a long moment. Then she looked at the man in the grass, at the fever climbing in his skin, and did the arithmetic anyway. He was hurt. She was the only one here, and the nearest town was 40 minutes off. Whatever the brand meant, it didn't change what was in front of her. She got her horse alongside him and spent the better part of 20 minutes getting a man who outweighed her by 60 pounds up onto the saddle. Then led both horses to the empty grazing cabin, the closest shelter with a cot, a water barrel, and a place to build a fire. She didn't ask herself if this was wise. She'd already decided. The rest was just getting it done. The fever broke on the second night. Ren had fallen asleep in the chair beside the cot without meaning to, and woke near 3 in the morning to find him watching her with the unfocused attention of someone unsure whether they're awake yet. "You're in the grazing cabin on the Ashby property," she said before he could ask. "Your horse is in the lean-to. You took a fever and your shoulders wrenched. How long?" "Second night." He closed his eyes, opened them again. "Thank you, don't thank me yet. You're not clear of the fever." He was clear by morning, though weak enough that standing left him gray in the face. On the 3rd day, sitting up against the wall with a cup of broth he could barely hold steady, he told her his name. "Ezra Holt," he said, "horse breeder. I was cutting through toward Milrose when my mare spooked at a rattler and threw me." He said it plainly, without the watchfulness of a man expecting a reaction. He didn't know she understood what that name meant on this side of the valley. She didn't tell him. That wasn't hers to hand over. The Holt name was her father's wound, and her father was 3 weeks into a trip to Laramie to sell horses before the winter market closed, not due back till the 2nd week of October. Whatever this was, it could wait for him. "Ezra Holt," she said instead. "Ren Ashby, I owe you considerably. You owe me the use of a cot." "That's the accounting." Something in his face moved, not quite a smile. "Is that how you keep things?" "Simple accounting. It makes them easier to carry." He held her gaze a moment, then let his eyes drop shut again, worn out from the effort of sitting up. She took the empty cup from his hands before it tipped, and didn't examine too closely what she felt about a man wearing that brand who just handed her own words back to her. He didn't touch the fence for another week. His shoulder wouldn't allow it, and the one time he tried to lift a rail, she told him plainly to sit back down, which he did, which she noted. By the second week, he was resetting a single post one-handed while she held it steady, moving slow and careful, testing what the shoulder would bear. Another week after that before he could manage the post hole digger properly. And by then it had become something they simply did together most mornings, not a debt being paid so much as a habit neither of them had named yet. "You found the tool shed," she said the first morning he went looking for it. "Door was open. I knocked first. There's no one to knock for." "Habit," he said and moved to the next post. She brought coffee out one morning and they stood at the fence line looking at the September light on the aspens already turning gold higher up the ridge. "How long have you been running this place with your father gone?" he asked. "Since my mother died, I was 8. He didn't offer a condolence, which she was grateful for. 20 years of them hadn't changed the fact. "My sister's buried near a creek too," he said after a while, not as an invitation, just a fact, laid down the same way she'd laid hers down. "How old were you?" 12. She was 8. They stood with that a moment, the wind moving through the grass, then he handed back the empty cup. "Third post needs resetting." "I'll have it by noon." She went back inside and thought, not for the first time, about a man who could say a thing like that and go straight back to work. He left a tin of healing salve on the gate post the following week, a note tucked under it. For the cut supply, she'd used the last of hers on him and hadn't mentioned it. He'd noticed anyway. After that, the encounters happened the way small valley encounters do, frequent enough to not quite be accidental, ordinary enough to need no acknowledgement. At the Timber Creek General Store, where he was buying wire and she was buying flour. At the farrier's, where their horses waited together and they stood in the same strip of shade the better part of an hour. It was there, waiting on the farrier, that he told her the rest of it. "I was sent to my aunt's in Milrose after Faye died," he said. "I was 12, grew up there, learned horses from her husband, built my whole trade out that way. Only came back to my father's place this past spring, once his health started going. I've been trying to piece together what happened to my sister ever since. Found an old letter of his that mentioned a spring shared between 2 fence lines and followed the trail of it. That's how I ended up on your East Road. You've been back 6 months, she said." About that, it explained things she hadn't known needed explaining. Why a man wearing that brand didn't seem to know what it cost on this side of the valley. Why he still moved through the land like someone relearning a place he'd loved and had to leave. At the autumn market, he bought 2 jars of her apple butter, said the second was for his father, who had a preference for apple. She watched him walk off with it and noticed before he'd gone 20 feet that the lid on the first jar was already loose and the level already down by a third. She didn't say anything. She filed it the way she filed most things about him. She'd started, without quite deciding to, thinking about the pantry shelf where she kept her preserves, about whether there was a way to sell them past the county line. Whether the old orchard on the north edge of the property could be brought back if someone put real work into it. She hadn't told anyone that. She wasn't sure yet why she was thinking about it more lately than she used to. She noted, too, that she still hadn't told him about her father. That could wait for October. It was only September. He asked her one Wednesday if she'd ever ridden the West Ridge. She had many times, but said no because she wanted to hear him describe it. He described it correctly, the way the valley opened past the third stand of aspens, the spring that ran clean even that late in the year. He knew it the way you know a place you've paid attention to. "My father's land runs the south edge of that valley," he said. "We've grazed that pasture since before I was born." She noted it. Filed it. They rode up on a Saturday, the sky enormous, the aspens making the dry rushing sound they make when wind moves through. He let her set the pace where she knew the land better. She let him lead where the creek crossed soft ground he remembered from childhood. "If the land were mine outright," she said at the top, "I'd bring the north orchard back. My mother planted half of it before she died. Nobody's touched it since. What's stopping you? Time. And a father who thinks it's more trouble than the apples are worth." He looked at her like he was filing that away too. "Where would you sell them? Past the county line, maybe." "If I ever got that far." "You'd get that far," he said, and it didn't sound like flattery. It sounded like an observation. At the top of the ridge, they could see both properties laid out below, the Ashby barn, the east fence now standing straight, and past it, the south edge where the Holt land began. He was looking at that line the way a man looks at something he hasn't finished understanding. He reached over and took her hand. She didn't move away. This is the last easy day, she thought. I should remember it exactly. Malcolm Ashby came back 4 days ahead of schedule. The horse sale in Laramie finished early, and he was crossing the yard with a saddlebag when he heard them coming down the north track. He stopped, looked at his daughter. Looked at the man beside her, looked at the horse, at the mark tooled into the fender, plain from 20 feet, a crow above 2 crossed lines. His face went somewhere past anger, somewhere older. Get away from my daughter, Papa, I know who he is. Get inside, Wren. She didn't get inside. She got down and stood between them. Tell me, she said to her father. Malcolm looked at the brand a long moment before he spoke. Your mother, he said. The fire, Jonas Holt's horse was outside our barn that night, his saddle on the fence post, that same mark. I went to him the next morning. He didn't deny being there. He said nothing at all. His voice was level, the way something held a long time goes level. He let me believe what I believed for 20 years. Wren looked at Ezra, still on the horse. Something had shifted in his face, not guilt exactly, something more complicated. Ezra, she said. Tell me what you know. He got down and stood with his hat in his hands. I was 12 when the fire happened. My sister Faye was 8. I was sent to my aunt's in Milrose 2 weeks after, and I only came back to my father's place this past spring, when his health started failing. I've spent 6 months trying to understand what happened that night because he's never once explained it to me. He looked at Malcolm directly. I didn't know until just now that you believed he started it. I didn't know what he's been carrying. His voice didn't shake. It went level instead, which is what a voice does when steady isn't quite possible. I don't know everything my father did that night. I know he was there. I know he's never spoken of it. I know my sister went with him and didn't come home. He held Malcolm's gaze. I'm going to ride home and ask him again. And I'm going to keep asking until I have all of it. He looked at Wren, standing between the two men, between the last easy day and whatever this was now. I'm sorry, he said, for what my family cost yours. He put his hat on, mounted, and rode south. Ezra found his father in the barn, working a length of harness leather. Jonas set it aside the moment his son appeared in the doorway. I met Malcolm Ashby's daughter today, Ezra said. I met her because I've spent 6 months trying to understand what happened the night Faye died. And today Malcolm looked at my saddle and told me what you never did. Jonas looked at his hands a long time before he spoke. I was riding to the Ashby place that night, he said, to settle the dispute over the spring. I'd wanted to propose we share the water 2 years and hadn't because my pride was in the way. He paused. I never reached the house. The storm caught me at the property line. Lightning struck the old oak near the barn. Sparks caught the dry grass at the foundation. I ran in to free the horses before the fire spread. I didn't know Faye had followed me on her pony until I heard her inside, calling for it. The animal had bolted into a stall and wouldn't come. She went in after it before I could stop her. He'd gone back in for her, gotten her as far as the door. Vera saw her go in. She was there that night. She and your mother had been close as sisters since before either of you were born. Vera had come to help with the horses, same as I had. She saw Faye run in and she went straight after her, no hesitation at all. Ezra sat very still. I went back for both of them. It was smoke and horses and noise, and in the scramble I knocked a lamp off the post. The fire caught faster after that, caught the loft. I got the two of them near the door. A support timber came down between us, threw me clear toward the door. I couldn't get back to them. He looked at his hands. Faye hadn't made it. Vera hadn't made it. When Malcolm came to me the next morning and said I'd started it, I let him believe it, because I had been there when I had no business being there, because I'd knocked over the lamp. Because his wife died going in after my daughter and I came out and they didn't. I believed I deserved every bit of what he thought of me. I still believe it some days. Ezra thought about 6 months of questions, about a woman standing between two men that afternoon. About a spring 2 families had fought over for no reason worth the cost. The families were close, Ezra said, before 15 years. Jonas reached into his coat and drew out a small locket on a chain, blackened along one edge, the hinge warped by heat. Open it. Inside, Vera Ashby on the porch steps, Faye tucked laughing under her arm, Vera looking down at her the way you look at a child who belongs to you, even when she doesn't. Ezra came back to the Ashby property on Thursday, not knowing if either of them would see him. He came anyway because not coming wasn't something he could manage. Wren opened the door. I came to talk to your father, he said. He had the locket in his hand. Malcolm sat at the kitchen table because Wren asked him to, not because he wanted to. Ezra told it plainly in order: the storm, the oak, the horses, Faye following without Jonas knowing, Vera going in after her, the lamp, the timber. He didn't start the fire, Ezra said. He was there without telling you why, and the lamp went over in the scramble to save both of them. And he's carried that for 20 years, believing he deserved everything you gave him for it. He slid the locket across the table. Open it. Malcolm opened it. His thumb stopped on the scorched edge. For a long while he seemed to forget Ezra was in the room at all. Vera, Faye under her arm, his own porch steps in the background. He knew exactly which summer, exactly which week. She wouldn't have wanted this, he said finally, not to Ezra, to the photograph. I know, Ezra said. Does your father know you're here? He wanted to come himself. I told him to let me come first. Malcolm looked at the locket a long while. Not today, he said. Tell him not today. Ezra nodded and stood. Wren walked him to the door, and when he passed her, she put her hand briefly on his arm. Not romance, just two people who'd stood in the same wreckage, acknowledging it. He understood. He rode south. Jonas came on a Monday on foot, the 40-minute walk from the South Line. He came without witnesses, without a written account, without an excuse prepared. He waited at the gate until Malcolm came out. I didn't start that fire, Jonas said across the fence. But I knocked over the lamp and I let you believe I started it because I was there and Faye followed me and your wife went in after her and I was the only one who came out. He didn't look away. My silence fed your hate for 20 years. I can't give back what you lost or what I chose not to tell you. I'm telling you now. I'm asking your pardon, not for the fire. For the silence? Malcolm studied him a long time. He didn't say, I forgive you. My wife's name was Vera, he said. I know, Jonas said. Your daughter has her eyes. She was 8 years old, Malcolm said of Faye. She was kind. She was. Vera would have gone in for her even if she wasn't ours to protect. That was who she was. I know, Jonas said. That's why I kept the photograph. Malcolm opened the gate. Not an invitation, just an opening, the way you let air into a room that's been shut too long. The valley did not settle into peace overnight, and not everyone was inclined to let it settle at all. Word of the reconciliation reached Amos Whitfield within the fortnight, Vera's own brother, the last of her blood family. Ranching spread 2 counties north and rarely seen in the valley since the funeral 20 years before. He rode in on a gray November morning with the particular fury of a man who'd spent 2 decades nursing a grief he considered settled business, only to find it reopened without his say. He found Malcolm at the barn. I hear you opened your gate to a Holtz, Amos said, not bothering to dismount. I hear you're letting that man's son court your daughter. My sister's daughter, you heard right. 20 years, Malcolm. 20 years I've watched you carry her memory the way it deserved carrying, and now you'll let it go for a locket and a sad story? It isn't a sad story. It's what happened. It's what he says happened, Amos said. Convenient, isn't it, that the only man who could contradict him burned up in that same fire? You've got no proof beyond his word and a photograph any man could have kept for his own reasons. Malcolm was quiet a moment. I've had 20 years of hating a man on less proof than that, Amos. A saddle mark in my own grief. I think I owe it to Vera to at least weigh the truth when it's finally offered. Rather than keep hating on a story I built myself in the dark, she'd have wanted you to protect her memory. She'd have wanted me to protect her daughter, Malcolm said. And Wren's happier than I've seen her since she was a girl. I won't take that from her to keep an old wound open for you. Amos left without another word, but he did not stay quiet about it. Through November, word moved through the valley the way word does, that Amos Whitfield thought Malcolm Ashby had lost his sense. That a Holt had talked his way into Ashby land with nothing but a burned locket and a convincing story, that a man ought to be more careful with his only daughter's future than that. Wren heard most of it secondhand, the way a person always hears the worst of what's said about them. She found her father on the porch one evening, turning the locket over in his own hands now, Malcolm having taken to carrying it himself some days. "Amos thinks you've gone soft," she said. Amos buried his grief the same way I did, pointed it at a name and let it set there 20 years. "I understand it. I did the same thing longer than he has." Malcolm looked at the locket. "But I looked at that photograph, Wren, and then I looked at Ezra Holt standing in my kitchen telling the truth about his own father with nothing to gain by it. And I know the difference between a man building a lie and a man finally putting one down. Amos hasn't had to make that choice yet, maybe he never will. That doesn't make my choosing it wrong. He might not come to the wedding. He might not," Malcolm agreed. "That'll be his choice to carry, not mine." Amos did not come to the wedding that spring and sent no word explaining why. It was, Wren thought at the time, the one part of the whole account that never fully resolved. Some doors, once shut hard enough by grief, simply stay shut, no matter how much truth eventually arrives to open the others. She wrote to him once that autumn, plainly, without asking him to change his mind, only telling him she loved him and hoped he'd find his own way to some peace with it eventually. He never wrote back. She let that be its own kind of answer and didn't let it cost her the rest of what she'd found. They opened the spring together in November, Jonas and Malcolm, with Ezra and Wren watching from the rise. The water ran clean the way it always had, patient through the whole dispute above it. They planted 2 trees beside it, one for Vera, one for Faye, Wren's idea. Both fathers said yes without arguing about it, which told her something. It wasn't reconciliation as a single event. There were still weeks when Malcolm couldn't look at Jonas without the old grief surfacing, weeks when Jonas couldn't come to the fence line at all, but the trees grew. One February morning, Malcolm came out to find Ezra saddling Wren's horse at the gate, and beside it, Ezra's gelding making a nuisance of itself, tugging his own glove out of his coat pocket by the fingers for the 3rd time that week, a habit Ezra had given up correcting. Malcolm looked at the brand on Ezra's saddle a long moment, not with forgiveness exactly, with the beginning of trying. "She likes the West Ridge in the morning," Malcolm said. "I know, don't keep her past noon. The south weather comes in fast this time of year." "Yes, sir." He went back inside. Wren came out with her coat and read something in Ezra's face. "What did he say? That the south weather comes in fast? Was that a blessing?" "Closest one we're going to get before the wedding," Ezra said, and got the gelding's glove back for the 3rd time. It was March before he said it, up on the West Ridge where they'd first taken each other's hand. "I've been turning something over," Ezra said. "And I want to say it plainly the way you taught me. I won't ask you to marry me just to finish mending what our fathers broke. That's not a reason good enough for either of us." "Then don't," Wren said. He went still. "Ask me because Tuesdays have become the best day of my week," she said. "Ask me because I've stopped riding this ridge alone and don't want to start again. Ask me because that's the truth of it. And nothing about our fathers changes what's true." He asked her because of that. She said yes because of that. They told her father first, then rode south to tell his. Neither man said much. Malcolm looked at the two of them a long moment and said only, "Well, the trees are already planted." Jonas said nothing at all and put his hand briefly on his son's shoulder, which was more than either of them expected from him. They married in spring in the strip of land between the 2 properties, not Ashby land, not Holt land, where the spring ran and the 2 young trees were coming into their 2nd season. Malcolm walked Wren to where Ezra stood and put her hand in his, looking at his son-in-law a moment, at a man who'd come back to a valley carrying a name he hadn't known the weight of, and hadn't walked away from it once he learned it. He nodded. That was all it took. Jonas stood on the other side and watched his son marry Malcolm Ashby's daughter, the locket with the photograph now on a chain around Wren's neck. Standing by the spring afterward, Wren thought about a Tuesday in September and a man face down in tall grass, about a decision made on simple arithmetic. He was hurt. She was there. She thought about a tin of salve on a gate post, an open jar of apple butter, a ridge in October with the aspens making that sound. She thought about her mother, who would have gone in for a child she loved even knowing the cost. And about a girl of 8 who'd followed her father into a fire because she was kind and brave enough to. She would have liked you, Wren said. Which one? Both. He took her hand. The spring ran on beside them and the two trees kept growing. That autumn, the North Orchard came back into bearing for the first time in 20 years. Ezra had spent the summer clearing deadwood and grafting new stock alongside the old. And by October there was fruit enough that Wren, true to the plan she'd once mentioned at the top of a ridge, sold 3 full wagon loads of apple butter past the county line. At Timber Creek and 2 towns beyond it, under a small hand-lettered label that read simply Ashby Orchard, Malcolm, who'd once told her the trouble wasn't worth the apples, ate his way through an entire jar himself that winter and never once mentioned being wrong about it, which Wren understood by then was as close to an apology as her father generally offered anyone. A letter came from Amos Whitfield the following spring, not an apology exactly, 4 careful sentences noting that he'd heard the orchard was thriving and that Vera would have been glad of it. Wren read it twice the way she'd once read Ida Voss's letters in another valley entirely, and decided that some doors opened slowly, a crack at a time, and that a crack was still more than a wall. She wrote back. He didn't answer again for another year, and then he did, and eventually he came to see the orchard himself, though never quite the fence line where the fire had happened. Some ground, she came to understand, some people simply need longer to walk than others, and the walking mattered more than how fast it happened. The spring kept running, patient the way it always had, indifferent to old wars, waiting for someone to notice it was still there. 2 trees grew tall enough within a few years to throw real shade across the water in summer, and on the hottest days, both families, Ashby and Holt, no longer entirely separate names, brought their suppers down to eat in that shade together, on ground that belonged by then to neither property exactly and to both.